新年好，中国！今天是1月1号，我们一年的新的开始。第一件事我想说的是，我想祝我所有的观众新年快乐。Now I'm going to turn the camera around. I want you guys to look behind me. Look at this. Yes, I'm in the middle of nowhere. So this is a very remote and rural village. So I'm roughly 75 kilometers or just 47 miles away from the China and the North Korea border. Why have I stopped at this rural village in the middle of nowhere? Well, this is a very special place to me. This is the birthplace of my grandmother and also my grandmother's sister. Many of my close family relatives, they're all born in this village, including my mother. So my mom and her younger brother, they were both born right in this village, just a few kilometers away. That's why I've decided to make a stop here. Now, it's eerily quiet because it is in the middle of winter. Nobody's going outside. It's very, very cold outside. And as you guys can see, in the background, this village is surrounded by mountains. So that's why this region is so remote. There's nobody ever comes here, nobody ever lives. Pretty much everybody that's in this town was born in this place. Now I'm going to take it just a few meters right here. I want you guys to look at this house right here. This one right behind me. Currently, it's occupied by some random strangers. Over 32 years have passed. Yes, I spent many months here during my childhood, even though I lived in a different city in a different province. But my grandmother, she would often take me back to this village close to the China-North Korea border. So yes, I've probably been to this place 5 or 6 times. Each time I was spent possibly a month, 2 or 3 months here. So yeah, this was my second childhood home. So yeah, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you guys that my family is country. Look at all of this remoteness. My family is really country. This is the place that I grew up. I have a very special story to share with you guys. And there's a very important reason why I returned to this village for this video for January 1st of 2025. My New Year's message to everybody out there is that you must be grateful for everything you do have in this world. And so the two people that I respect the most in this life, they're my grandmother and also her younger sister. Unfortunately, they both passed away from cancer just 3 years ago. So I have a very special story to share, especially about my grandmother's younger sister. She lived an extremely poor and an extremely difficult life. As you guys can see, from what you can see behind me from this village, this is extremely rural and extremely poor. My grandmother's sister, she never ever had any money, even up until the moment she passed away. But she was always happy, she was always content, and she was always grateful in life. So that is going to be my message as I narrate to you guys throughout this video. Alright guys, so let me give you guys a bit of a backstory. So if you guys are wondering where I am, what is this place called? So this is called the Kuandian Manchurian County. So this place is too small to be classified as a city. I did mention China has a 5-tiered system to their cities. So this is a tier below tier 5. You can consider this to be tier 6. It's not big enough to be considered a city, so it's considered to be a county. In Mandarin Chinese, it's called a xiancheng. By the way, something interesting, this is the boron capital of China. If you're wondering what is boron, you might have heard of that term before. Boron, sand, Chernobyl, nuclear reactor 4. April 26th, 1986. Does that sound familiar? So yeah, roughly 50% of the boron in China is produced right in this tiny little county. So it is in this county, my maternal grandmother, that is, and also her younger sister, my mom, and one of her brothers, they were all born in this little county. The population in 2025, roughly 330,000. So I know that's 330,000, right? That sounds not bad. For Chinese standard, it's very small. It's not even classified as a city. So, by the way, something that's very interesting. So, my grandfather, he's not from this place. He comes from very far away. He comes from the Sichuan province in a city called Dazhou. So, how did he arrive at the China and North Korea border? So, this county is only 75 kilometers or 47 miles away from the China and North Korea border. So, well, this is a very, very interesting story. So, you guys have to remember that China was unified by Chairman Mao Zedong and became the People's Republic of China on October 1st of 1949. However, what happened right after that? 1950, the Korean War broke out. And of course, at the time, China was an ally of North Korea. So, my grandfather, he was drafted into the war. And yes, he crossed the border from the Yalu River into North Korea. He did participate in the Korean War. It was absolutely brutal. So he was a foot messenger at the time. He was extremely young. I believe when he was first drafted, when he first entered North Korea, he might only be 14, possibly 15 years old. So he was not old enough to carry a gun or go onto the battlefield. So yeah, they used him as a foot messenger. Sometimes when they have to relay a note or something, and he was responsible. So he was quite a good runner, you can say, back in the day. However, unfortunately, he was injured by a stray bullet. And after that, basically, he had to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. And as he got older, his mobility just completely deteriorated. And he had to walk with a cane all the time. He rarely went outside anymore. The brutal Korean War finally ended after 3 years in 1953. And after that, my grandfather, so he did not return to the Sichuan province. Instead, he was assigned a position since he has experience from the Korean War. So he became an instructor in the People's Liberation Army. He was an instructor for the Cannon Division. Now, why was he stationed in this Kwandian County? Well, the county is chosen for a very specific reason. It is extremely safe from any war or any conflict because the entire county is completely surrounded by mountains, and there are just these massive tall mountains everywhere. So it's just like a Switzerland. That's why, this county, it's very, very small. It's very, very remote. That's what makes this county very, very remote and very, very safe because no army is going to try to cross the mountains into this region of China. So in 1957, my grandmother, she was born in the Kwandian County. So at the time, she was just 17 years old. And one day, just by a random chance, as she was walking by, she saw my grandfather in his army uniform. Even though my grandfather, he stood at only 5 feet and 4 inches tall. But I guess at the time, for a Chinese man that's born in the 1930s, this was considered to be about average height at the time. But, he had this charming smile and he had this, army riz possibly, right? He's got this very fancy uniform from the People's Liberation of Army of China. I guess so he's a charming smile and this army riz, this rizzed up my grandmother instantly. In China, they call this 一见钟情. And this roughly translates to a love at first sight. So it was actually my grandmother that began pursuing my grandfather. Yes, you heard that correctly. Even though at the time, 99% of the marriages at this time period was all arranged by the parents. So my grandmother, she was a bit of a rebel. So her marriage was not arranged. At the age of 17, she began pursuing my grandfather. And just 1 year later, at the age of 18, my grandmother would go on to marry my grandfather. And yes, they did stay married all the way until the end. And my mom and one of her younger brothers would be born in the county of Kwandian. So as for my grandmother's sister, standing at just 5 feet tall and 77 pounds. Yes, 77 pounds. You heard that correctly. The reason why she's so thin like a skeleton is because she lived her entire life in misery and extreme poverty. And she's truly an iron lady. I have a tremendous respect for her. I would say one of the person that I respected the most on this planet. Now, she worked as a nurse for her entire lifetime. She made a decent salary. Though the work was extremely difficult, she had to work 72 hours a week, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. That's China's 996. But even though she made a decent salary for herself, however, her parents, they were extremely, extremely poor. And towards the end, when her mother got extremely ill, this will be my maternal great-grandmother, when she got extremely ill towards the end. So my grandmother's sister, she actually resorted to selling her own blood. Yes, she was selling her own blood on the black market in order to cover her mother's medical expenses. She did that for many, many years in order to prolong her mother's life. That was the extent of her sacrifice. I cannot imagine living a life like that. That's why she thinned out so much. Towards the end of her life, she weighed just 77 pounds. Now, she did also have 3 children. This is my grandmother's sister. However, unfortunately, all 3 of her children are basically deadbeats and they're completely useless.
One of her son never worked a day in his entire lifetime. He was just extremely lazy. She will find a job for him. He worked for a couple of days. He says that he's not feeling it, and he would just go back home and begins leeching on his mother. So that was the life she lived. So and because of this, right, despite the fact that she made a decent salary as a nurse, she had to rent an extremely cheap brick house like this one I'm showing you guys in the video. That's basically where she lived for her entire life. Wasn't always the same house. She bounced around a few times, but you guys get the idea. It's one of these complete garbage brick houses, and there's not even a bathroom in the house. So, if you want to use the bathroom, right, you have to use one of these makeshift dirty brick public squatting toilets. It is absolutely disgusting, and the stench was absolutely horrendous. In one of these brick houses that she rented, water was only available for a few hours a day. Life was extremely difficult, and the place she lived, as you guys can see, this was so remote. In order to take the train just to get to the hospital, she had to walk roughly 30 minutes each way to the train station, and when she gets to the train, it's roughly another 30 minutes train ride to get to the hospital, plus a 12-hour shift. If you include the commute, that's 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. She lived an extremely, extremely difficult life, one that 99% of people on Earth cannot imagine. But every time I saw her, right, she was always grateful. She was always happy. Always remember that you cannot be a good person if you're ungrateful, and you cannot be a grateful person if you're unhappy all the time. She never ever once complained in life. She never ever complained about having to sell blood in order to cover the medical expenses of her mother. She never ever complained, not even once, about how all three of her children are basically deadbeats, and she had to basically sacrifice all the money she made in order to cover the expenses of her three children. She lived a life of extreme poverty and extreme hardship, but I have never ever seen her unhappy once. I have never ever seen her complain once, all the way until her death. By the way, she passed away along with my grandmother. They passed away just a month apart. So she passed away at the age of 80, and my grandmother, she passed away at the age of 82. That happened 3 years ago. May these two Iron ladies rest in peace. Yeah, and yes, I will be visiting the graves of my grandmother and also my grandfather in the upcoming video. Thank you guys so much for staying till the end for this very, very special video. And I hope you guys will have an amazing year of 2025. Thank you guys so much.